Hey there, School of Tomorrow, folks. I'm going to do a fairly short one today. I'm starting out on Twitter, and I've said earlier that I don't consider myself a super user of Twitter. I'm not following a huge number. I've done about 4,662 tweets on this one, the Curbster. If you want to follow me on Twitter, if you want to get in touch, that's one way, okay? But as I said earlier, this channel is not at the current time offering a lot of pointers, although I have pinned a course, and this is something you might want to think about doing. And the course, of course, is kind of heuristics for teachers. And some of you are wondering, is this still heuristics for teachers? That got started very recently here on September 17th, and certainly it is. We're actually continuing with our discussion of church history a little bit. We're doing intellectual history, and my goal all along here has been to sort of trace a tale that hits on some high points I want to emphasize. For example, filmmaking. We do a lot more study of film, the genre, how it's made, and its role in history. We connect to the fact that politics is theater. We connect to the fact that the military speaks in terms of in theater. In other words, what we do on this planet is leave records, i.e., make movies. And what are the movies we're making today? And what movies do we see from yesterday? And of course, the Romans didn't have film cameras, but had they, we would have seen a lot of triumphs, we would have seen a lot of emperor stuff. Now, what I'm talking about in terms of church history is very specific as well. I don't hit on every film or try to be all encompassing. I trace a fairly tight path around this network, this planet. In other words, I want you to get the gist of it quickly. So if you're just joining us today, in fact, here's another way to package heuristics for teachers is like strategies, including strategies for sharing your teachings. And as I've been suggesting, you can throw all your YouTubes into some kind of giant stash, right? So sometimes I jump into your videos and I give you a look at where we're at in terms of, there is a chronological order that does make a difference, but I also design my videos so that they can be fit together in almost arbitrary order or just other suggestive orders. And actually, a role model for this would be Ludwig Wittgenstein, shown here with a arrow on his face. But his views and his technique are often mentioned here. Vienna Circle would be a way to anchor some of the content. I've been going through Emerson Transcendentalism back from Bucky Fuller, and I've just appreciated recently because I'm not, the world continues to unveil itself to me, and I learned things that everyone else already knew. I come across artists that everyone's heard of, and I'm like late to the party a lot of times. But I just found out that Nietzsche was a big admirer of Emerson, and there was a sense of kinship or friendship more between them. Not that they communicated, right? Nietzsche from afar is looking at Emerson's writing and feeling inspired, and some of his Zarathustra you can trace to his ideas he's getting from Emerson, right? He looks at him as Nietzsche is very highly educated in the European manner, and there's always been this looking down on America for its low culture compared to European high culture, right? It's all the scruffiness went across the Atlantic and started a scruffy culture. And indeed, to this day, people will speak of like made in Europe and say, oh, that's European, with sort of like we're looking up to Europe. And I have no problem looking up to Europe. This is not a rant about like we should look down on Europe or anything like that. It's just America back in the time of Emerson was a new country. So yeah, I've packaged up my Tetra volumes in Python with Python as a course. I call it a mini course. and then I go out and like I advertise it on Synergio. I'll leave this while I talk. You can read this a little bit, and I'll go back to my narrative here. So we can come forward through Nietzsche to Emerson by way of the concept of friendship. I haven't fleshed that out yet, but you'll know from other videos and from my Quaker spin here, Quaker school, that friends, religious society of friends, is a very anchoring concept, and partly has to do with the Bible quote where Jesus is saying, I want friends, not servants, right? He's looking for co-equals he can share with and do what friends do for each other in terms of networking and sharing the good news and all the stuff that he's all about. He wants friends to do that, right? He doesn't want obedient servants. And this whole relationship of friendship, important in Quakers, I'm going to say mythologically, and I've talked about this before, we want to bring in the Mithraic tradition. And I'm going to sketch like a model of Mithraic religion. By the way, showing on the screen is stuff about property. If you've just emerged from a tunnel of some Python that we just did in the last two videos, there's some lingering questions you might have about that property decorator. And I want to disclose to you that it's actually a class behind the scenes. This is not it. This is not the property class, but actually we can find the source code for the property class somewhere here in the Python documentation. But back to where I was with my narrative, right? We're talking about Emerson, Nietzsche, Wittgenstein. We got a lot of balls in the air here. Mithraic tradition is, in my mythology, where you go down, down, down under the streets of Rome, or into a temple, some other place where Mithraic religion is practiced, and people are co-equal. And let's say that's even just an idealization. It's like you're all down there. You've gone through these different sacraments. It's true that Mithraic tradition has like ranks or degrees, very like the Masonics, right? The Masons, I should say, and other religions, right? Just the whole idea of degrees is taken up in academia, right? You have this sort of stair-step pattern as you get closer to, you could imagine, a center. Degrees could be concentric circles or concentric spheres. Could be, not saying they have to be, right? So the Mithraic tradition would be, there's a different kind of equality in that we're all just enjoying this Mithraic sort of friendship here, even though in our walks of life, maybe you're the president of a hospital and someone over there is, you have different levels of responsibility, right? You're a psychiatrist, you're auto mechanic, who knows, right? You're a soldier, you're all different kinds of walking into the Quaker meeting, you're from all walks of life, but there's kind of an equality assumed before God. And I think that's what a lot of God talk is good at. It's like people get to express great gratitude for whatever prosperity or whatever goodness and not be thanking the king or the emperor. It's important to express gratitude psychologically, but to express it as debt to a human being, that's different from having a deity to absorb your gratitude. And I think democracy and this kind of deist talk are not contradictory, actually, because one way to have equality is to thank the cosmos and thank like universals and not feel like you have to get on your knees to some human patron who you are also thankful for, which doesn't mean that you stay unthankful or ungrateful for your human collaborators and friends, right? You thank God for them, right? But you know that humans don't create humans. The people in our lives, they do. They conceive humans and give birth to humans, but consciously, ego plays only a little bit of a role, maybe in who you choose as your mate and so forth. But most of what we do is in a way automated, you could say. We don't have to think about it for it to happen. It happens on its own. Puberty comes, your hair grows. And Bucky emphasized this a lot in his thinking, the sort of automaticity of cyber world. And when I say cyber world, I mean feedback world that has nothing to do, I mean automated worlds that has nothing specifically to do with humans. Or, humans have governments and steering function and cyber this and cyber that, but so does nature. Nature ecosystems have feedback loops and are cyber, automatic steering, government. If you take away all of humans, is government gone? Well, it depends how you use the word government, obviously. I would say nature brings its own sort of rules to the table, right? Anyway, that's why I bring that up, is because in American Transcendentalism, the country was trying to kind of assert, okay, we're not Europe anymore. We're going to have our own philosophy, our own identity. So it's kind of like the way Brexit is Brexiting Europe. Uh, the U.S. was exiting Britain, right? It was U.S. exiting the British Empire. It was the U.S. becoming its own empire ultimately. And in so doing, it needed its own literature, its own sense of identity, its own sense of philosophy. And that's where Emerson came in. He was helping Americans define themselves and their philosophy, right? And if you're like British, you can kind of look down on that. And to this day, I don't think we study Emerson as much in philosophy, partly because of lingering prejudice against American philosophy. Where I think I'll be taking it, though, to give you a heads up, I mentioned Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley and so on. I'll be working back through another teacher of mine, Richard Rorty. I've mentioned Walter Kaufmann already, but my thesis advisor at Princeton on my Wittgenstein work was actually the great American pragmatist, highly celebrated philosopher all over YouTube, Richard Rorty. I haven't talked a huge amount about him, and I'm not going to claim to be like an expert. We um, we did talk quite a bit, one on one some. I really liked his classes, and I think his pragmatism and his meaning of pragmatism connects very strongly to the Wittgenstein syllabus, right? The way he talks about non representational language, and I think that's going to be important too for limbering up the mind enough to get into synergetics. In other words, American Transcendentalism could use some limbering up, some prying open of your mind a la Wittgenstein as kind of how you can find an approach to synergetics that works for you. It's not physics. Like I'm saying here, and I'm going to conclude with this, introducing my mini course on tetravolumes with Python, which basically is the last two videos plus an earlier video called Random CCP Tetrahedrons Have Full Number Volumes. That's the beginning. And then tetravolumes with Python and so on. So here I've created a little mini course here. And what I'm saying about it is, however, in the meantime, as we try to pioneer the digital math track, Lambda Calc, as I call it, through high school, that's an ongoing, like, boring, like making a tunnel. It turns slowly. We make progress. In the meantime, however, American literature is better positioned to appreciate the philosophical merits of synergetics more than any physics faculty, I would say. The discipline of revectoring words to have different meanings is the opposite of practicing a settled science. We're in the domain of psychology, spin, right? So synergetics, I'd say, is anchored. It's kind of a Neoplatonism. It's got its definite kind of meanings, but they're not, he's using the same words that we find in other disciplines in his own way, like frequency, big example. Angle and frequency are sort of meant as defining of pretty much all you need to know about something. Shape is defined by angles irrespective of scale, and then frequency identifies its spatiotemporal identity, you could say, right? Putting it into the world as special case is more associated with frequency, whereas pre-frequency, we're just talking about shape alone, you could say. You have this sort of sculpture garden, sort of this little beautiful concentric hierarchy sculpture that doesn't make any claims as to what size it is, right? The frequency of any system is determined by the isotropic intertriangulated omnidirectionally considerate vectorial and module subdivision enumeration of the system's radial and geodesically chorded circumferential closures, totally relevant involvement limits taken in respect to the system's independent event regenerating center. So that's the kind of sentence that people don't want to read because it's what? Is this some kind of machine language thing? Is this some kind of AI? But actually, it's just exercising, I would say, your phonemes, getting your limbered brain that's able to think prosaically using prose. I know that's not quite what we mean by prosaic, but we're doing mathematical imagination and thinking in a prose style, but it could have been free verse, and it is sort of poetic. And I use the omnidirectional halo as my like bridge concept to show that we are going from a philosophy to a philosophy. In other words, the synergetics discipline and magnum opus should be considered a philosophy, and it slides over into literature through omnidirectional halo and becomes a part of American Transcendentalism, which I'll be linking to Rorty's pragmatism. Over time, don't have to do that all today. So I hope that was entertaining, and we'll see you back here.